Thank you everybody for joining us today for the Meet the Scientist webinar. Today we have the pleasure to meet the team from the Rush University Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center. So as a reminder, the Meet the Scientist webinars is an opportunity for junior investigators to meet teams of investigators that are working to end Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. It's also an opportunity to learn about their work and also ask questions about their work. So everybody is encouraged to submit their questions using the QA option at the bottom of the screen, or also the chat, if you have the chat available as well. So we will leave all the questions towards the end, but if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to use those options. As a reminder as well, so we have two more, like including the one for today, two more Meet the Scientist series for the spring. So today, as I just mentioned, we are going to meet the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center. And the last one of the spring is happening in May 17, and we are going to meet the University of Kansas Alzheimer's Disease Center. So all the previous recordings from the webinars, all the links to the webinars are actually available in our website. So if you actually missed one of the presentations, or if you want to rewatch one of the presentations, please go to our website and all the links are available there. So now I would like to start by introducing the team. So as I was saying, thank you to the team of the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center for joining us. I'm gonna pass it to Dr. Barnes. Dr. Barnes is professor of gerontology and geriatric medicine at the Rush Medical College, and is also a neuropsychologist at the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center. Dr. Barnes, thank you for joining us. I'm gonna pass it to you.
Thank you, Akil. Am I off of mute? I think so. Okay, cool. Thanks, Akil, for the invitation. And I'd like to also thank the sponsors for this Meet the Scientists event. I'm going to give you a little bit of background of our center, introduce our speakers, and a little bit of background about myself. But I want to leave enough time for everyone, so I'm going to go through sort of quickly. So the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center was founded as an independent center in 1985, actually with startup funds from the CEO of Rush Medical College at that time. Then in 1991, we were funded for the first cycle of the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Core Center as a P30 through the NIA. And over the past 30 years, our Alzheimer's and aging footprint has grown to encompass more than 40 faculty, 130 staff across 11 strategic areas. So the five of us presenting today are united around one of those strategic areas, health disparities and health equity. But we're only a fraction of investigators who are interested in this space. On the left, I have all of the faculty from Rush, the Alzheimer's Center. Dr. David Bennett is our director. And this faculty list is multidisciplinary and represents a broad range of disciplines and expertise. You'll hear a little bit about that from the individual speakers today, but our center also covers omics, computational neuroscience, and clinical pathology as key components of what we do. There are four major research areas shown on this slide, representing a sort of a broad swath of what we do. There are population studies, which covers 6 cohort studies, longitudinal cohort studies. Then there's patient-oriented research, which includes our memory clinic and patient repository that feeds our clinical trials program. We have neuroimaging studies, mainly anti and postmortem MRI, but we are moving into retinal imaging and PET as well. And then we have laboratory studies. Here is a very active area for us because the majority of our cohorts include organ donation. And we provide brain tissue and other biospecimens to people all across the world. And all of this work is done across race and ethnicity. So diversity is a key strength for us at the center. And we are able to address a wide range of scientific questions related to aging, health, and well-being using a wide range of approaches in our diverse communities. And this is what it translates into, what you see here, a large, diverse community of committed and altruistic older adults who are deeply phenotyped. And they devote not only their time and energy to us as researchers every year, but in many cases, their organs. And so we owe a great debt of gratitude to every single person and in our studies and every family that they're connected to. So a little bit about me. Yakil already told you what I am, but I also co-direct the population research studies at our center, and I'm the PI of 3 of the longitudinal cohort studies. And I want to just acknowledge the amazing team that we have that really helps us run our longitudinal epi studies. Of course, we couldn't do anything without the amazing RAs, coordinators, community engagement people, phlebotomists, nurses, you name it, we have it. And I also want to acknowledge our funding sources listed on the slide. So my background is I'm a proud Southside Chicago person, born and raised, and my path to Rush has not been linear. I started off at the University of Chicago lab schools, where I went from 3rd grade to 12th grade, and then went to Wellesley College outside of Boston, and quickly learned that Boston was nothing like the South Side of Chicago. So I did an exchange program at Spelman College in Atlanta in my junior year. And when I tried to transfer to Spelman, I was told that I couldn't because I had signed a contract with Wellesley. So I went across the street to Clark Atlanta University and finished there. And, I had some amazing experiences there that really helped me know that I wanted to study the brain and memory. And so I went to U of M and did a Ph.D. in biopsychology, and then a postdoc at UC Davis. And it was in my last year of my postdoc that I pivoted to study Alzheimer's disease, because I had been studying experimental neuropsych, mostly in stroke and rare brain diseases, but decided that I wanted to have a different impact in Alzheimer's. And so I came to Rush in 1999 as an assistant professor and have been here ever since. So one of the foundational things that I think I've done at Rush is to create this cohort called the Minority Aging Research Study, called MARS for short. And when I came to Rush in 99, there were 2 other studies, but they were majority white. There was the Religious Order Study and the Rush Memory and Aging Project. And I really wanted to have a study that helped me understand aging within African Americans. So I applied for an R01, I didn't do the K first. I went straight to the R01 because I needed more money. And I, was funded to do this study, and have been following people since 2004. We were just refunded for years 16 to 20. And the study now consists of about 800 African Americans. The study is harmonized with all the other cohort studies at the RADC. We follow the same concept of recruiting from the community. We do in-home testing. And the white religious order study and memory and aging project cohorts, they require organ donation. But in our diverse populations, we can't do that. And so we work hard to get it, but it's optional. And we have about 100 autopsies to date. Our recruitment and retention efforts are very community centered, and you'll hear more about this from Dr. Glover. But I wanted to point out that for us, it's not just the staff doing this work, the PIs are also in the community, really working hard to build trust and build relationships. So I have a number of areas of interest that I, have been trying to grow over the past 2 decades. And one of the things that I do is to try to understand racial differences in cognitive aging, since we follow people, every year, many times until death. And I'm just showing you snapshots of some of the papers with the citations, so you can look them up if you choose. But, we try to understand racial differences in cognitive aging, given that we know that diverse populations are at an increased risk of Alzheimer's, but we don't really know why. We try to understand early life contextual factors that are linked to race. So we have this great paper by Dr. Lamar that has looked at early life segregation as a potential explanation of cognitive performance in late life. And I've really been interested in experiences of discrimination as a key risk factor in older Blacks. And I've looked at it across a number of different outcomes listed here. And, we also get blood, and we know that Alzheimer's has a strong genetic component. So we're very interested in understanding racial differences and genetic effects on cognition. And because we get the brain from many of our participants, we've looked at racial differences in neuropathology as well. I'll just quickly say a little bit about the other two cohorts that I lead. The clinical core is part of our P30, and it consists of about 300 older Blacks. They all agree to annual in-home evaluations, and we're also recruiting for organ donation as well. It's harmonized, like I said, with the other cohort studies, so we really can increase our sample size for power to do different analyses. And then a few years ago, I got a Center of Excellence to look at the intersection of HIV and aging. And this is legacy data now that is available for people who are interested, but it was a cohort study of about 350 people, half infected with HIV, 50 and up, harmonized with all of our other cohorts so that we could understand if HIV was accelerating the aging component or not. And this center also had a strong community engagement and research training focus because we really wanted to sort of bring in or build a pipeline of people interested in health disparities. And so Dr. James will touch on this in his presentation because he's one of the co-leaders of our research training efforts. So this is my contact information. I'm on Twitter. We are looking for postdocs. We're always looking for research assistants. It's a great place to work, and just let us know if you're interested. And I'll pass it on to the next person.
Dr. Barnes, can you, okay, maybe now I can, okay, now I can share my screen. Thank you very much. Dr. Barnes, thank you everybody for the opportunity to be here and to speak with you. So my name is David Marquez. I am at the bottom of the screen, the leader of the Latino core at the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center. My primary position is at the University of Illinois at Chicago in the Department of Kinesiology and Nutrition. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got to this place. I find that I'm a jack of many trades and hopefully a master of some of them. So I study health equity, mostly in physical activity and in brain health. And I direct the exercise psychology lab at the University of Illinois, Chicago, but most importantly here, the leader of the Latino core. And I have to give credit to my dad and my mom. So my dad lived with and passed from Alzheimer's disease a little under 1 year ago. And so the work that we all do related to Alzheimer's became not only a professional, but a personal issue for me. And I saw my mom and the caregiver that she was, and just what amazing role models they were for me. So I like to always acknowledge them in talking about my work, and also acknowledging the team at Rush and a couple people at UIC. So there's a deep commitment at the RADC related to health inequities, focused on Latinos and especially Spanish speakers. So our team here and a couple of people that are part of my team at UIC. So you'll see pretty much one state here, but this was not by plan. So like Dr. Barnes, I was born and raised in the city of Chicago. I was born on the north side, so Dr. Barnes and I can argue about which side is better later, but this is where I'm from. And I went to get my bachelor's degree at Loyola University, Chicago, which is in the city. Some of you might know from their NCAA basketball runs over the past few years. And I didn't decide upon my major until like the end of my sophomore year when I was forced. And so I chose psychology. I loved psychology. I loved social psychology, looked into graduate programs, but ended up working for a year, an unintended gap year. And people feel differently about gap years. Mine was unintended. I worked full time in a group home. It was really challenging, and I thought I want to get back to school. So I looked into social psych programs in Ph.D., ended up applying to 3 schools for sports psychology, and then realized there's very few people who do that for a living. And so I applied to a school in Florida, in California, and Illinois, got accepted at Illinois. And so I ended up staying within the state of Illinois. I did my master's degree and enjoyed what I was doing. And this is where I started doing work on exercise and aging. And that's where I completed my PhD in 2004. Then I moved to your state, for many of you, of Massachusetts, and was an assistant professor, tenure track, University of Massachusetts Amherst. But it was tough to do community-based work. Amherst is primarily white. Springfield is about an hour away. Holyoke, which is mostly Puerto Rican, about 45 minutes away. And so I was able to move back to Chicago in 2007 because I wanted frozen. Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me? Can somebody
We can hear
me?
you.
Okay, so I moved, sorry about that, technology. So I moved back to Chicago, working at UIC, and in 2015 began with the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center. In Massachusetts, at least the people doing research with older adults, you know about this, the vast increase in the number of older Latinos with great increases in the population, but we need to create environments that are welcoming, where people want to come into our studies because of things like this. The report that came out of University of Southern California and Us Against Alzheimer's, which showed this ridiculously huge increase in the number of Latinos with Alzheimer's disease over the next 30 to 40 years. So I got started doing my work with older Latinos relative to physical activity. Myself and a Latin dance instructor created the Bailamos dance program, which was meant to increase physical activity. And then we were examining what are the different outcomes of engaging in regular physical activity in the form of dance. And so my team and I received an R01. We had the BILA grant, including a couple people from Rush, including Dr. Bob Wilson from the RADC. And this really required a lot of community engagement, networking, recruiting. There, I think I'm back now. Sorry about this. Mutual trust and respect that was built. And so it was through this work. So here are some publications, and I can share this later. The work that I had done with older Latinos in the Chicago area and applying for some pilot funding through the RADC generated some meetings with myself and Dr. Bennett, who Dr. Barnes mentioned is the head of our ADC. And in 2015, we were funded with the Latino core of our ADRC. And I had concerns because I'm not a neurologist, I'm not a neuropsychologist, but I've done research with older Latinos. I've actively recruited and retained older Latinos. And Dr. Bennett said, we have a true team here that works together, right? We can harmonize our findings across the different cohorts, like Dr. Barnes mentioned. And so we got funded in 2015 from NIA for the Latino core. At this point, we have about 244 people, older Latinos, in our study. We look for 60 and older, preferably 65 and older. They do not have to donate their brains, but like Dr. Barnes mentioned, we have this optional. And so far, 76 people have signed the Anatomical Gift Act donation, and 3 have passed away. And we have secured one of those brains. So just some really, really important work. There's a citation here that talks about research from all of our Latinos across our cohort studies. So I urge you to take a look at that paper, and please reach out to myself or others that are in our center regarding this work. And so thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. And at the end, I look forward to questions. And so now Dr. Glover will be presenting.
You have to stop sharing.
Oops. Amy, can you stop sharing the screen?
I think he's frozen.
That's a problem.
See if I
He
can.
didn't plan for this.
Yeah. Hmm.
I can know.
Because nobody can take over because he's sharing.
And
Yeah.
the only one that I can take over is me. So let me see.
Oh,
So,
can you cancel his
yes,
screen share?
I can try to share
Okay.
something. Then, no, didn't work.
Hmm.
It didn't work. That's interesting. Do you want to?
We thought we had this all figured
There
out.
you
Oh, there we go. All right.
All right.
Okay, Crystal, you should be up now.
All right, guys, you should be able to see my work.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Crystal Glover. I wear many hats at the RADC. I am a social psychologist and mixed methodologist, but most importantly, I am a health equity and aging researcher. I do lead our outreach, recruitment, and engagement ORACOR, and I chair the overall NIA ADRC's OR steering committee. Okay. So before really getting started, I have to thank the wonderful people I get to work with, of course, at all the RADC, but specifically my teams, the ORACOR and the Mixed Methods research teams. Okay. So before all of that, I was born and predominantly raised in Louisiana, but based on my dad's job, we got to move around so much. I got to live in El Paso, in Boston, outside of Boston, in Fort Devens, but by the time that we got to say middle school or early high school, we were back in Louisiana. So I really was keen on going to LSU. But I think all that traveling around, I really was interested in the diversity of the world. So by that time, I knew I wanted to focus on psychology at LSU. And I went on to get my doctorate at Howard in social psychology specifically, but also minored in neuropsychology and biostatistics. Now, I was always focused on diverse aging or diverse pathways for health. And I started recognizing that biostats were the bones for the lived experience, but I really wanted to understand the full specimen. So I had to add the fat or the muscle too. And that's when I went to Dartmouth and started on a mixed methods research program in understanding health in diverse communities. So I had my basic interests, which was really in social cognition. So understanding how people perceive themselves and each other, how they act on those perceptions, so their behaviors, and also in context of various situations. So I really wanted to focus on that using mixed methods. So really pairing qualitative and quantitative methodologies together to have a full picture of a specific research or study purpose. But as I moved forward, I found myself at Rush. I was doing a health disparities research fellowship. That's how I arrived from New Hampshire to Chicago. And I really wanted to hone in on brain health, healthy aging, and thinking about cognitive and brain health. So what are the perceptions, behaviors, and lived experiences really doing for people as they age, diverse persons as they age? What's the role of cognitive health as well as social cognition and healthy aging? But I quickly realized that it's way more than how we perceive ourselves, the behaviors we take on, and how we interact with one another. We're within, say, institutional context, so say education, employment, housing, healthcare, but also communities. All of these things are working social and systemic or structural barriers of health to really inform what we think, how we act, and how we interact with each other, and really our healthy aging or aging trajectory. So I noticed two things as I wound up at the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center in 2016. Is Blacks and Latinos are at higher risk of developing ADRD, but also severely under-included in research. So we have these sister issues. So if we're thinking about it social cognitively, we have no idea or not a good idea of how individuals perceive ADRD, issues related to Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, different educational materials, clinical trials or epidemiological studies, but they're also not participating in them either, or being able to participate, so we're unable to develop those educational materials, intervention strategies, as well as our pharmacologic approaches. So that's how I wound up at the OraCore, or with working with the OraCore. And we have a great strategy, myself, my colleagues, those on the call here and beyond, with really saying, get to know Blacks, Latinos, others, all communities more. Give first. What can we give there before advocating for research? But by all means, make sure to give back. What are we learning? What's the field thinking? Where are we going now? So they could take that information, not just for themselves, but for their families and their communities. But also something new that we're trying out is co-creating studies with different participants, activated participants I can talk about later, and also co-creating solutions to challenges that we face during the research process, and that's the design and develop. But really being a social psychologist at heart there, I am really interested in social cognitive processes, or ways that we perceive big issues in ADRD and aging, particularly sensitive topics such as brain donation or organ donation, as we discussed before, PET scan, clinical trials, and really seeing we don't have a lot of information about why people do what they do, their perceptions about these different procedures, of the utility of them for their families and communities. So I decided to have the mixed methods research studies to start delving into that. And one of my first at RADC was around brain donation, focusing on barriers and facilitators to brain donation among older Latinos, older Blacks, and older whites of lower income. Okay? So a snapshot of some findings here is that even among people who say yes to brain donation, so say facilitators, the big focus, the big facilitator motivating factor is family. So for Blacks, it's about giving back to the community. Latinos, a strong focus on their culture, and whites of lower income really thinking about giving back to society overall. But these same individuals said that family may serve as an impediment of sorts to having actual completed brain autopsies once they pass away. So I say all that to say that we can engage older adults, but it's really important, especially for Blacks, Latinos, and countless others, to really engage with and include family members. So with mixed methods work, I couple quantitative and qualitative together. This gives you a snippet of what I am doing now, taking the qualitative themes and sub-themes and the thousands of variables that we have, quantitative variables at the RADC, to say, how does this map on for a larger, broader, more diverse group of people to have a more complete profile of people who say yes and no to brain donation, particularly Blacks and Latinos. So like any academic, I have a lot of research outside of the RADC. Back when I was at Dartmouth, I was in psychiatry. I've kept that work going with some of my colleagues at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and work around comorbid type 2 diabetes and psychiatric illnesses, as well as family psychological symptoms among patients in or with COVID-19 in the ICU. So everything together is focusing on how to create, facilitate, foster, going from inequality to justice for everybody. So thank you. Please look me up, email me, and I'm more than happy to talk more. Thanks.
Stop sharing.
My name is Melissa Lamar, and first of all, I just want to thank Keel for inviting us to come talk to you today, and also for all of you for joining. I really appreciate being able to speak to you today. So again, I'm Melissa. I'm a licensed clinical neuropsychologist in the state of Illinois. My background is in clinical neuropsychology, and kind of my day-to-day work is in cognitive neuroscience. As Dr. Glover so aptly put, I think we're all here because we have a very connected and committed kind of research agenda to increase health equity and ultimately get to health justice in brain aging. Some of the didactics and things that I do around the RADC, I know there's a lot of early stage investigators and students on the call that might be interested in some of the activities that we do at the center. I co-direct a neuroepi seminar series where we have experts come in to discuss certain topics a couple of times a year. We just completed a series on alternative approaches to cognitive assessment, and we're in the midst of a series on insulin resistance in the brain. I'm also the lead neuropsychologist on our clinical pathologic case conference. In addition to being able to say that correctly as often as possible, I also will present cases that we've followed in the clinic all the way over to autopsy. And so along with a neuropathologist and a neurologist, we present these cases about 2 to 3 times a year. And it's a lot of fun to kind of get everyone brainstorming and thinking about what a person may have. And then of course, getting the neuropath, which may or may not always align with what we think. So before I kind of get into certainly what I do and why I do it, one of the things I want to do is certainly thank everyone that helps get this work accomplished. I've had the great fortune to be able to work with many students and early career investigators throughout the years. This is just a small representative sample of some of the more recent ones that have come through my lab, and I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to have worked with them. I certainly want to thank the funding sources from the National Institute on Health for my work in particular. And also my ability to work not just within the RADC, but outside of it through the Hispanic Community Health Study or Study of Latinos. And here I've listed some of the key principal investigators of that work. And finally, and certainly because of the last year, I definitely want to thank my husband for all of his help and support through these unusual times. So speaking of unusual, my academic life certainly has not been a linear trajectory to where I am today. As you can see from this, this image, I started out in Atlanta, Georgia, and when I was an undergrad at Oglethorpe University, I reached out to Felicia Goldstein at Emory University, who was kind enough to take me in, teach me about neuropsychology because I knew absolutely nothing. And when I graduated, I went on to do a focused Ph.D. program in clinical neuropsychology at Drexel University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. From there, I took an intramural research training fellowship with Dr. Susan Resnick at the National Institute on Aging, where I focused almost exclusively looking at neuroimaging in the Baltimore longitudinal study of aging. So that's really where I kind of learned some of the tools that I have gone on to use throughout my work. From the NIA, I moved up back to New York. That's where originally I'm from. And was at Columbia University for a little while before, and as you can see from the zigzagging up the East Coast, I mean, it was either go to Maine or leave the country. So I hopped over to London for a couple of years and worked at the Institute of Psychiatry at King's College London, where I enjoyed increasing my international collaborations and doing a lot of work over there with old age psychiatry. About 10 years ago, I moved back to Chicago. Well, I moved to Chicago. I can't say I moved back. I'd never been here before, but certainly I'm glad that I came. I started off at the University of Illinois at Chicago, which Dr. Marquez mentioned earlier. So I knew him from there. And then a few years ago, around the same time that Dr. Glover joined the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center, I did as well. And so that's how I've ended up here. And I certainly enjoyed the ride and look forward to where life takes me. So this is kind of a mood board of my academic interests, I suppose you could say. Across the top are the various areas in red that I tried to think about in my work. In yellow, you see really a string that kind of has gone through my entire career. I've focused on modifiable vascular risk factors as they impact primarily white matter tissue in the brain, and what that means for cognition and also for affective dysfunction. Thinking about ways to reduce dementia, reduce things like depression, and certainly more recently, since coming to the RADC and Chicago more generally, thinking about ways to increase health equity. You see in blue other things that I use in terms of tools and topics in my work. And most recently, you see other things in green, like the role of the environment. And I've been doing more advanced neuroimaging analytics using connectomics to try to bring all of these things together in the work that I'm currently doing. So again, I mentioned when I first landed in Chicago, I had the fortune to work with the many amazing people at the Hispanic Community Health Study of Latinos. I continued that work and have expanded it out through several ancillary studies that are also being conducted through SOUL. One investigation of neurocognition and aging with Hector Gonzalez, and another, the SOUL Inca MRI study with Dr. Charlie DeCarli. And this just shows you some of the work, again, that really focused in on those modifiable vascular risk factors as they relate to cognition and brain aging in a diverse Hispanic and Latino population. Now, I talked about kind of cutting my teeth at the NIA on neuroimaging, and I continue to kind of try to develop those skills and tools, particularly as we move forward with advances in the field. I've primarily focused not just on white matter damage, but more so on tissue that's vulnerable to damage before that overt damage occurs. So up in the top left-hand corner, you see some work that I've done with multi-component relaxometry across diverse populations with the hope of kind of detecting alterations in myelin integrity before we see that white matter damage so that perhaps we can intervene before it goes from vulnerability to damage. Not only have I looked at whole systems, but more recently, we've started to look at particular regions that are most affected by cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. So in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you see some of those regions of interest, and we're working up some different connectivity matrices to try to understand how the holistic network integrity system may be affecting cognition, and particularly cognition with a bent toward the Boston process approach. I'm assuming many of you in Boston know about the great Edith Kaplan. I had the distinct pleasure of working with her and learning about the Boston process approach while I was in graduate school, and I continue to use that to this day. So for those of you not as familiar with the Boston process approach, it's not just about what the end score on a cognitive test is, it's about how a participant gets there. So for example, you see here that we have two clocks that just have a few numbers in them. Well, what this represents is one person anchoring all their digits on the clock before filling it in, and a different person going around just in a circle with the numbers. Neither one's wrong. Both of these people had great clocks. But the point is that those different approaches to the task actually ended up showing different networks that were involved in those activities, as you can see in the top right-hand corner. Below that, we've expanded this work looking at kind of different ways that people do things into looking at the judgment of line orientation, looking at items that are going to be very, very easy to do. So those horizontal and vertical lines, very simple to figure out what line that is, versus some of the ones that are more oblique, a little bit more difficult. And what we find is it's that process of those distinctions that actually relate to different network integrity across the brain. And of course, within all of this work using neuroimaging tools or the Boston process approach, really trying to frame everything, thinking about social determinants of health, particularly as related to non-Latino Black and Latino populations. We know either through our own experiences or the experiences of friends and others that acculturation is not something that is a one-way street. It used to be thought that it's just someone adapting to where they are, but that's not the case. It's really a dynamic exchange of a myriad of different things, some of which Dr. Glover talked about earlier. And so I'm trying to capture that in the work that I'm doing in the Latino populations, both with Dr. Marquez and the SOUL study. And that includes getting assessments of neighborhood health. So here you see a heat map of crime across Cook County in Chicago. And what a student of ours did is look at how crime affects individual health. And it turns out that higher levels of crime in someone's neighborhood where they live actually increases or is associated with higher levels of stroke risk that is subsequently associated with lower levels of cognition. So certainly where we live affects how we live. And I think as we use all of these different tools in our arsenal, and certainly the work that I do at the RADC, it's important to keep all of these things in mind for all of our participants. So thank you for your time, and certainly I look forward to questions at the end, and anyone's free to contact me who might be interested in working on this agenda with me.
All right. Let's see here. I'm sharing my screen. Let's see if this works. Okay. Is it full screen? Everyone can see it?
Yes.
Thumbs up. Okay. Hi, I'm Bryan James. Thank you so much, Akil, for having us all on. This is fantastic. I'm an epidemiologist at the RADC. Up front, I want to thank the teams that I lead, the data documentation and distribution team, as well as the Medicare linkage team. And I'll be talking about both of those teams and what we do. Also, my funding, my KO1 just ended, where I got to look at some of the stuff I'm going to show you here on hospitalization and cognitive decline. I have nothing to disclose. All right, I'm going to keep my origin story brief because we don't have that much time left. But you know, some of the important things that happened along my journey was when I was at University of Pennsylvania, I met Jason Karlowicz, who became my first mentor. If any of you know him, he is a fascinating thinker on the topic of Alzheimer's disease and the ethics of research in Alzheimer's disease. He just wrote a book here, The Problem of Alzheimer's Disease, that I highly recommend. There's actually a chapter on our very own Lisa Barnes in it, which is fascinating. And it talks about her journey that she just talked about. Then I did my PhD in the Epi of Aging and Social Epidemiology at Hopkins. And that's where I really got interested in the social determinants of health, this kind of socio-cultural hierarchy that I think have been in most of the speakers' talks so far about, you know, how our health is really dependent on this larger context in which we live. And I also have to mention, you know, my biracial upbringing as a child of a Vietnamese mother and a white father in Washington, D.C., as well as living in Baltimore, Philadelphia, now Chicago. You know, that biracial upbringing really has shaped my interest in health equity and diversity. I'm going to start up front with some of the activities I do outside of the RADC. And I really like this Meet the Scientist format because it gets, for the, I think, first time ever, I get to talk about all the stuff that I do, not just one particular project as a researcher at the RADC. So one of the really cool things I've done for over a decade now is work on the Alzheimer's Association Facts and Figures report. I write the prevalence and mortality section. We go into a lot. If you're interested in racial and ethnic disparities in Alzheimer's, we have a whole section on that in the prevalence section. And actually the latest, the 2021 edition has an entire section on race, ethnicity, and Alzheimer's in America. So check it out. I also host the Epidemiology Counts podcast, which is a really fun thing that I've been doing. So check it out. You can find it anywhere you get podcasts. And we just did one on racialized policing and its impact on minoritized communities. I'm also the co-host of the, co-chair, I should say, of the Society for Epidemiologic Research Scientific Dissemination Committee. And kind of in concert with that, I am a social media editor for the journal of SER, which is the American Journal of Epidemiology, which is pretty cool. I get to tweet about health equity and about epidemiology and health research, you know, for the journal. So find me on Twitter, Bryan D. James, follow me. And a lot of the stuff I'm interested in will be on there. So as I said, I lead the documentation and sharing team at the RADC. And, you know, I want to linger on this slide because this is where you can actually find all of the studies that we run, the 6 cohort studies that Lisa mentioned, the data we collect, the variables we collect, and we are committed to sharing our data and specimens to the greater research community. So if you go to www.radc.rush.edu, you can see everything that we collect, you can submit requests, and you can work with our data. So this is everyone, including students. You know, you don't have to be an established researcher. Anyone, you know, you can use these for student projects. So please look into that. If you have any questions on our data or the process of requesting data, send me an email. Lisa also mentioned the CETA internship, and this is one of the things I'm proudest of leading at the RADC with Crystal. We both are the faculty mentors for this program, and every year we get 4 high school or college students up from the Chicago area, usually from underrepresented communities, on the south or west side, not always, but that's kind of the target that we shoot for. A lot of them are first generation college students or graduate students. And the point is to increase this pipeline and diversify the pipeline of aging researchers. And we, even after people do their 8-week internship with us, these students are phenomenal. They go on to all sorts of master's programs, Ph.D. programs, MDs, everything. And we continue their mentorship, after they're in the internship program. So I could focus on a lot of the work that I do at the RADC, but I decided to focus on what I'm working on lately, which is this Medicare linkage program. I'm not going to be presenting results on health equity and health disparities for, I'll tell you why in a second. Most of the work I've done in that area at the RADC has been as a co-author with my amazing colleagues who are on this webinar right now. And I'm super excited as a co-investigator on Mars to be leading some projects in health equity going forward. But for the Medicare linkage program, what we have is we've supplemented the cohort study data that we collect at the RADC with linkage to people's Medicare claims records. So, if people provide us their Medicare beneficiary ID or their Social Security number, we can actually ask CMS for access to their Medicare claims. And we have done this, we've obtained Medicare claims from 1991 through 2018. This allows us to see so many things we can't see just through survey methodology. All the medical encounters people had in over 25 years, all the hospitalizations, every diagnosis, every procedure that they've had done that was billed to Medicare. So it really can supplement what we collect in the cohort studies. Now, unfortunately, my K award was based on, so I shouldn't say unfortunately, but what happened was we originally got this Medicare data just for one study, which was the Memory and Aging Project, which was an absolutely amazing resource, but the Memory and Aging Project is primarily a white cohort. So many of the things that I want to look at in the future, I couldn't look at in my K award in terms of health disparities in healthcare utilization. But what I did get to look at is the relationship between hospitalization and long-term cognitive decline in many older adults. And so I'm going to show you very briefly, one of the main findings is that it was non-elective or emergency and urgent hospitalizations that led to people experiencing an increase in their rate of cognitive decline, whereas elective hospitalizations were not related to a worsening of cognitive decline. And because we have all of this neuropathology that we collect, I was able to see if there was a relationship between the amount of Alzheimer's pathology in people's brains after they die and the rate of decline if they were hospitalized. And what you can see from that solid line on the bottom is that the people who had the most tau pathology and the most hospitalizations were actually the people who declined the fastest. So finally, as I mentioned before, we now are in the process, we've actually obtained Medicare records for 5 of our cohorts. And the ones that are in red are the ones that have been described so far in terms of being either all Black or all Latino. So the Minority Aging Research Study, Clinical Core, Latino Core. And you can see on the bottom that about 19% of all the people that we have with Medicare records now are Black and 8% are Latino. So this opens up just an amazing avenue to look at disparities in health and healthcare utilization that I'm really excited to look at in the coming years with my colleagues on this webinar. And that is it. So please, email us, tweet us. This is my family. There's actually 5 people in that picture because my wife and I are expecting twins. So at some point we'll be a family of 5. Some point soon. All right, thank you very much. Oh, actually, I wanted to leave that up. Let's see. Should we leave this up while we do Q&A so people can see our hub, or should I turn that? Nah, I probably should turn it off, huh?
Yeah, just turn it off.
Yeah. All right. Oh, perfect. We're on time. I did it. I got us back.
Thank
9 minutes.
Thank you so much, everybody. And while we wait for some of the questions from the attendees, so I'm going to start with a couple of questions myself. First of all, listen, congratulations for all the work. I really like, and I know that I'm biased, but I really like the flavor or diversity put into the work. So thank you so much for moving that forward and all different, like including like all the different groups and so far. I have a question. I was wondering if part of the work that you have been doing have include any kind of like a studies or immigration stories, you know, kind of like how they even linked to the early life context that you describe or at any point, but taking into account the immigration, especially from the Latinos and I don't know if you have access to refugees there, but like the Seneca trying to get that in connection with cognitive decline, risk, and Alzheimer's and other dementias.
Dave, do you want to take the lead on that, or do you want me to?
You can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Well, certainly our cohorts, we don't query anything in terms of refugee status. I do know that there's centers for that within the Rush University Medical Center that are doing work in those areas. So if that's an interest for anyone on the call, including yourself, I think there are avenues for collaboration there. Within the Latino core and the self-identified Latino and Hispanics of our cohorts more generally, certainly Dave, as well as David Bennett, have done an excellent job of thinking about questions to be asking to get at certain aspects of immigration. They're maybe not the most comprehensive, but we certainly have data in that space, as well as data around early life experiences that we can incorporate into anyone's questions.
Okay, thank you. And Lisa, you had a question in the QA. You see it in the QA.
Oh, retinal studies. Yeah.
Can you read
So
the question, please?
Yeah, so Dr. Barnes mentioned the RADC's venture into retinal studies. Can you please describe these projects further? Well, you know, in our cohort studies, we were not heavily into fluid biomarkers, not yet anyway. And so the retinal studies was going to be our first foray to try to get an in vivo marker of amyloid. And so we are now doing some retinal imaging, working with a group of ophthalmologists, I believe, to scan our participants in the Rush Aging Project, Mars, and LATC and ClinCore to get a measure of amyloid. And then in those people who also donate their brain, we're going to also get their eyes so that we can, you know, actually measure all kinds of, you know, pathology that might be in the optic lobe and the eye and correlate it with what we see in the retinal images. I don't know, Melissa, if you want to add anything since you're in the imaging team.
No, I mean, I think you've covered it. Certainly all that data is processed by an outside company and given back to the RADC for use within as well as outside of the center for all of those cohorts.
And that data will be on the hub once it's cleaned and processed for anyone to use. We are really quick at getting our data onto the hub.
Sure.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I don't know, I already write down the address. I'm definitely going to check that as a resource. Okay, well, we get other questions. I'm going to keep asking my questions. There was Melissa that was talking about this study with crime, like the different sums of crime and the increased risk for a stroke. So I was just wondering if in that study you found like any greater risk for anything else beyond a stroke in terms of health that you can share.
Yeah, it's a great question. It was a pretty focused, so that was one of my PhD students' dissertations. So she was kind of very encapsulated into those questions. However, we certainly are geocoding all of the data at the RADC cohort studies for all of those same variables. And the grant that I have is actually looking at neighborhood health as it relates to brain health in the Latino core. So we'll be able to look at many different metrics. And certainly, again, that data will be available for other people who may have other interests.
Very cool study, I think, like the first time that I see something like that. Thank you for that. I have another question for Crystal. I know, Crystal, that we have talked about this many times, but with the brain donation program that you were describing, I don't know if you look into differences between like being like first generation, second generation, you know, any changes in being like Latino for the first generation, second generations, anything that you can share on that?
I will say that wasn't specific, so we didn't examine those potential differences or overlap. It did come up, however, in terms of family and saying who would need to be included in decision making. So, whether it's family in Chicago, in the United States proper, or globally in other countries, of people that would need to understand and engage in that decision. So, that definitely came out and is something that all of us on the call have discussed about exploring a little bit later, at least with geographic differences, country of origin differences, and immigrant trajectory differences, or overlap even. I'm open to that too. But the big role of family is what just stood out. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. And let me check if there are any questions because we only have like 2 more minutes. Okay, so I'm gonna ask another question I have a couple for Bryan. So I think that it's very interesting what you were saying about like looking at these differences between healthcare utilization. And I was wondering if you have any plans of looking at that in the context of COVID, you know, like how the participants actually were using the services in the past year, or even like differences in the rate of hospitalization between the minorities versus the other groups. Any plans on that?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, the work that I'm doing on hospitalization takes even more meaning in the time of COVID, and the amount of, you know, ICU hospitalizations that just, you know, hundreds of thousands extra, you know, beyond what you would expect in a normal year from COVID. And I'm, you know, I've given a few talks about how that may lead to a surge, you know, a second tsunami, you could call it, of dementia after this wave of COVID is over. And the answer is absolutely yes. The one thing is it won't be for a few years, because you actually, there's a 2-year lag in Medicare data that's available. So like it's 2021 right now. So you only have access through, I believe, 2018 or 2019, because there's always a 2-year lag for them to clean everything up. But sometime in, say, 2023, I will absolutely be looking at how our participants' healthcare utilization changed in the time of COVID. And we, of course, I should also say, if you're going to mention COVID, that we have all sorts of COVID projects going on that probably Lisa could tell you more about. We're getting brains of people who have COVID and looking at, you know, synergies between Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative pathologies and what COVID does to your brain. So all sorts of stuff we're looking at there.
Perfect. I think that we are running out of time, but there is one question in the chat. I don't know if Lisa or anybody wants to.
I was trying to type, but I'm too slow. The CETA cohort is legacy data now. So the question is mainly to CETA work on race, ethnicity as one of the factors related to brain and cognitive aging in individuals living with HIV. Considering the COVID-19 pandemic, do you expect to expand this research core to HIV and COVID-19 intersections? That would have been lovely to do, but that data set is a legacy data set, has been closed off. And we are interested in trying to resurrect it, but we don't currently have funding to continue to follow those people. But
maybe that's an angle right there.
Right, and we do have stored, you know, blood from them, but you know, it would have been before COVID, so that wouldn't help. So, but good idea. Thank you.
Cool.
Perfect. Thank you again. So thank you all the speakers and the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center for joining us. And thank you for everybody for attending. I think that with that, we close it out. Thank you and have a good day.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Akil.
much.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.